Okay, welcome everybody. This is Doug McCall from the International School Health Network. Um, I'm a member of the FRESH Partnership, which is a group of UN agencies and donors and international NGOs that meet regularly to promote health and development through schools. And so we're pleased to be organizing this series of what we called open web meetings on the topic of health education and life skills education. And this particular session, as the slide indicates, is looking at competency-based curricula and cross-curricular approaches. And I've added a third idea that we're probably not going to have time to get to, which is the kind of common skills that go across all the many different health and social topics. So that's the intent of this meeting. I'm very pleased to be welcoming Dr. Leanne Como, who is Executive Director of the International Union for Health Promotion and Education. And Leanne will be speaking about some of the work that she did in Quebec as part of her work with the Institute for Public Health in Quebec when she was working on school health promotion. And I'm also pleased to welcome Suzanne Hargraves from Education Scotland. Scotland has a cross-curricular approach to health and well-being that is quite exemplary and should be a good start to our conversation about that particular strategy. So I'm going to be turning it over fairly quickly to our two speakers, and as I indicated in the session description, it really is an open web meeting. We're trying to explore this topic and allow for lots of discussion, and that discussion will guide the development of a fairly comprehensive paper that will include these three topics noted on the slide. The working group is composed of over 60 people from different parts of the world and with different expertise on different aspects of health and personal and social development education. And it would be very challenging to bring everybody together in a meeting unless we had the money to be able to bring them into a meeting, and that's not possible. So we're doing it in bits and pieces, rolling it up into the report and so on. The purpose of the exercise is to have an influence eventually on the monitoring that's being done of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. If you've been following that process at all, the UN agencies are monitoring all of the different 17 goals, and of course goal number 4 deals with education. And within goal number 4 there's a target called 4.7, which is dealing with what is defined as the high quality of education. And of course, coming from our perspective, we're very interested that there is a long-term and coherent approach to health and personal and social development education as part of that definition of high-quality education. So we established the FRESH working group, and we've also been able to work with a group called the World Education Research Association, which is a network of education research associations around the world. They tend to be stronger in high-resource countries like Scotland and Canada and the US and different parts of Africa and Asia and so on. And so we have established a research network that will follow up on the discussions from the work group. And I'm very pleased as well that we formed a consortium to look at teacher education and training, as well as the training of other professionals who work in schools, and that's going to be led by a new group of deans of education. So it's a consortium of education and other faculties that we're just getting started as well. So that's the process. As I say, the goal ultimately is to be able to get a better handle on what are realistic outcomes for health and personal social development education, and how can they be monitored in a realistic way as the UNH and all of us move forward. This is the scope of what we call health and personal and social development education. We've put it within the 17 UN goals, so you can see them as it goes around those colored sections of that circle. Goal number 4, education, is on the right-hand side, and we've tried to identify the many different aspects of health and personal and social development education. Using the word...
Doug,
Sure, yep.
Just 1 second quickly. I don't see the slides moving from my end. I don't know if other people...
I've only got the introduction.
Okay, I think I may have somehow clicked on to make it just me then. Let's just see how... oh, I see what I need to do. I need to take... I'm going to return to the presenter's view, which is the slide now should be on the introduction. Is that showing on your slide?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to, rather than switch presenters, Leanne, can you click on the slide and move it forward? There we go. And,
okay.
and I need to take over as presenter to be able to see it, to be able to control it, so I don't need to do that. So coming back to the slide, this is the scope of health and personal and social development as we've defined it in the working group. It's positioned within the 17 UN goals, which are the colored parts of the circle there. Number 4 on the right-hand side is education. And we've defined health and personal and social development education as not only within the classroom, but outside the classroom and indeed in the community. So you have co-curricular activities, you have extracurricular activities, you have school-linked web activities and so on. School routines are another way of learning. School climate is very important to reinforce learning, and so on. And so and then the various subjects, the various curricula, are noted within the circle around the 2 kids there, and you can see the different subject areas that we're going to be talking about today in terms of cross-curricular. And so it's a very wide scope, and we'll be exploring different parts of that as we move forward as a work group. Leanne, can you click one more slide then? And just to give you a reminder, these are the kinds of subjects that occur in most schools around the world. Health and well-being is on the left-hand side there, the lower, and you can see the different subject matters. So that's kind of giving us the breadth of the subjects and learning at school. Leanne, if you take one more slide forward, we can then begin your presentation.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I see one more person has joined, Elizabeth Shui. Welcome, and thank you very much, Doug, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I'm always happy to engage with the International School Health Network. So I'm currently at IUHPE, which is an independent global professional network for those of you who don't necessarily know us, and our mission is to advance health promotion and health equity. The organization has existed since 1951, so quite some time, coming up on 70 years. And it's always been based in Paris, but operations are now run out of an international secretariat in Montreal at the School of Public Health of the University of Montreal. And so we're basically interested in all aspects of health promotion, including school health promotion. But the work I'm presenting today is really largely based on things that I've done while I was, as Doug mentioned, at the Institute, National Institute of Public Health here in Quebec for a few years in collaboration with the Ministries of Health and Education for the province. The work is grounded in a few frameworks and theoretical models. So we've got, the broader UN health promotion school approach that you all know, but also theories from the education literature on competency development and what that entails, and also positive youth development, which is a broad heading that includes approaches like social and emotional learning, but importantly, that takes into account the developmental process in looking at promoting health in a school context. Stop me anytime if you have questions. I don't mind. As Doug has said, this is a discussion, so it doesn't just need to be me presenting. So, unmute yourself if you wish to speak, and we can have exchanges as we go. So the fundamental idea behind all of this is really cross-sector collaboration to find innovative means of reaching goals that are common to both sectors, so education and health in this instance, and to allow really for synergy across the actions that lead to benefits that satisfy both sectors, but that also go beyond what either could achieve on their own. So you want to fulfill the school's mission, and you also want to maintain and improve health and well-being of all children and adolescents. Okay, whoops, there we go. So our starting point, basically, we know that health promotion is being done in schools, or in the word, in the terms that that this group has been using. We know that health and personal and social development education is being done, but perhaps not in the most efficient or effective way. Typically, what's been observed is a lack of coordination, sometimes redundancy, and sometimes contradictions as well, as because of the lack of coordination of messages and information. And but mostly, I think that what we've seen is that health tended to overwhelm the school system with a whole bunch of baggage, as we have here in this image of suitcases, where you have people coming into the schools wanting to talk about their own health topics, not necessarily keeping in mind the context in which they are doing that and how schools function and what their mission is. But I think that, well, what got us started on this whole path was that, thinking about these suitcases, and we thought, if we unpack them, we'll probably find that a lot of them contain some common elements. When you talk about how to promote health to prevent violence, or when you talk about promoting health to improve nutrition, or to lower stress, or to have a healthier sexuality, or to any number of themes, you would find some commonalities there that may make it less overwhelming to address. So instead of looking at each of those themes separately, we took a step back and took a look at how children develop and what they experience as they grow up, and look at the whole child, and also more broadly at their environments, and asked ourselves, so how can we prepare them then to successfully deal with these situations, given what they're experiencing and given how they develop? Is that clear so far?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
So, sorry, I keep not clicking on the right button to advance my slides. There we go. So what does it mean to be competent? What does it mean to deal adequately with the situations of daily life that can impact one's health and one's well-being? Well, it means that you know how to adequately combine and then mobilize the resources that you have. So your personal resources, your knowledge, attitudes, and skills, and your external resources. So, does your environment promote safety? Is it secure? Does it offer healthy choices in terms of physical activity, nutrition, and so on? So, in other words, what we want to do is support the development of competencies that are relevant to help children and adolescents deal with the situations that will impact their health and their well-being. So this idea of mobilizing and combining resources is based on a definition by Tardif in the education literature. So which competencies then? I mean, it's good and well to say that, but we need to narrow down which competencies we're speaking of, and then set up a way in which they are developed over time among children and adolescents. So when we unpacked those suitcases from that image before, and we did find a lot of commonalities, and we did a whole analytical process, and I will spare you the details because it was quite tedious, but we basically extracted from that material 7 core personal and social competencies that were common to the themes that health educators typically want to address, but that were also common to a range of situations that children and youth experience. The first one is self-knowledge, which is not really a competency, but it's so implicit in all the others, and it's kind of a prerequisite in a sense that we've included it in the model. But the competencies themselves are these. So you have coping with emotions and stress, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. Asking for help, so for oneself, but also for others, and having, the mechanisms to be able to do that, and the supports in place to be able to and to get responded to. Engaging in pro-social behaviors, which means, treating people in a way that is fair, inclusive, conducive to positive relationships, to be established and maintained. So it's really interpersonal interactions. Also managing social influences, so recognizing positive and negative influences, and being able to deal with those in adequate ways. Making informed or responsible lifestyle decisions, so around things that influence health and well-being, and engaging socially, so this whole idea of social engagement with the community, within the school, to address causes, for instance, that are of interest, like the environment or other safe mobility, walking to school, having healthy options around the schools for food and things like that. So, just engaging in broader projects that sustain the environments in which they are growing. So how does all of that work in different types of situations? We've basically categorized the situation that kids and adolescents go through into 3 broad categories: lifestyle or health habits, social relations, and then a whole big one around change, transition, stress, or whatever difficulty or adversity one may encounter. And so these are examples from high school, but I think what's important to say here is that these competencies that I've named are competencies that are meant to be developed throughout the entire school career. So from kindergarten until graduation, they are the same competencies that get developed and exercised in various ways through various situations, and we can bring in the health themes such as sexuality or tobacco or alcohol or nutrition as they become relevant developmentally in terms of the situations that youth encounter, because we recognize that there are some theme specific informations that need to be conveyed and taught, but we think that they need to be brought in at the right time, and also that implies making some choices about what you're going to address when, across your curriculum when you look at the whole school experience. And I don't think I really insisted on this, but I'll just go back to my previous slide for 1 second. So these competencies that we're talking about, it's not just a health education problem, or it's not just teaching things or knowledge and skills and attitudes. I think that it's very important to stress that to develop these competencies, you really need the supportive environments to do that in. You need, for instance, schools that offer a climate that is conducive to positive relationships, and you need schools and communities that will facilitate smoother transitions from one milestone to another, or from one type of schooling to another, like when you transit from primary school to high school, for instance. And you also want an environment that offers services to youth who need specific things and services. Okay, so sorry, I just had to backtrack there for a second. So we're back to these competencies. So basically, then, what does that mean in terms of programming when you want to work on a set of competencies over several years, and then bring in, as needed, different kinds of situations and themes? Okay, this is just extracts of PDFs that I've downloaded from the health ministry here, and it's not very pretty to look at. But you can see that we've got, well, you may not be able to read it very well, but we've got a range of themes that can be addressed at the top, and then we've got colors that correspond to the competencies that I've named before. And don't try to read this, but I just want to explain the logic of it, just so that you can see the kind of mapping exercise that needs to be done when you're talking about developing these competencies over time. So you've got the colors that match the competencies, you've got grades, and you've got a whole set, this very small writing in the first column. It's a whole set of knowledge, attitudes, and skills that are to be covered. And it tells you at which grades that happens, and it also highlights which health themes are covered by those knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So it's a very complex mapping exercise based on the situations that children experience and based on the developmental process. And way at the top, you have intentions that that drive how all of this is mapped out. So we have tables like this for every year of the school curriculum, essentially. Okay, so again, just to put it in different terms, what does it mean to adopt a competency model versus a theme-based model in terms of how you program your interventions, or in terms of how you set up your curriculum? Well, you need intervention that address environments in terms of the school, the community, and then you need these educational interventions that are based on that mapping of skills that are relevant to competencies, to themes, and to the development of the children. And you need to take all that then and embed it in regular school subjects, including health and or physical education. We had started to work when I was still at the Institute on, concrete examples of how to do that. So activities that teachers could adapt that took this whole framework and presented it in terms of, projects and tasks that tied into school topics, to subject matters. And but that wasn't quite done when I left, and I'm not really sure where they are with it, but some of that work exists. And then all of this also raises another question, which is, what does it mean in terms of evaluation? What kind of outcomes do you monitor when you take an approach like this? And because the focus really is on competencies, I think that's really the outcome measure that we're looking at here. We're not looking straight away at health outcomes. I think, first of all, you want to verify that the children, the adolescents, are indeed developing those competencies that you set out to teach them. And that raises specific challenges. If you're versed in competencies at all, you know that it's not that easy to evaluate that without being too normative and without being too tedious, because you usually require observations from different people to assess a competency. So from the children themselves, from their professors, from their teachers, from their parents. So how do you adequately capture that? And that's also something that we had started to explore, but we hadn't gotten that far in that thinking. I think but I think it's a very important consideration, because it really shapes how you develop it and how you then talk about it in terms of what you want to achieve with it. I think, yes, okay, so I'll leave it at that. And I don't know how you want to work, Doug. Do you want to take questions for this one, or do you want to go straight to the other presentation?
Well, just maybe do it in one small step and then a larger step. If people want to ask a specific question about Leanne's presentation to help clarify, please do so now, and then we'll have Suzanne make her remarks, and then we'll come back and open it up for a broader discussion. So is there any point that our participants want to just raise directly with Leanne right now about the work that was done in Quebec? And thank you, Leanne. It was an excellent overview of what Quebec has done and what you were doing with the Institute. I think it's a bit of a good roadmap for others to follow. And I think as I'm learning more about this particular thing, I think we're going to find that other countries are on that same journey. So questions or comments for Leanne before we go to Suzanne?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Say something. It's not a question or a comment, really. I mean, we're working in exactly the same sort of field. We're producing this, I think you know, Doug, this white paper at FAO on school food and nutrition education. And, these questions are coming up, including the curriculum development phase and the interaction with the environment. All I wanted to say at this particular moment is I hope there will be very much more extensive and intensive discussion, not only now but in the future, about how these things are shaped and structured, because I think, we have a bit here which is just slightly different from the bits that you have, and where it would be really fruitful to sit down and work it all out. That's all.
Well, I'm glad to hear that there's convergence in all of this. And I mean, we know that there is, but it's always nice to hear from people who are doing that same work.
I have got one tiny question I think I might ask right now, which is, having looked at your bilingual thingy, illegible bilingual thingy that you put up on the screen, what I'd like to know is, how would the children perceive it? How would you translate it or interpret it so kids could understand what they were supposed to be doing and going and that kind of thing? Would that happen at a different level? So that's my question.
Yeah, well, that thingy was...
Sorry, I can't remember what it was called. Competence sheet.
Yeah. No. No. It's a fine and useful term. Is really meant for the teachers. I think I don't think we have any intention of getting the kids to understand necessarily what we're trying to do here, but have it have contents and experiences and activities presented to them that allow them to develop the competencies we want them to develop at the same time as they're learning everything that they were meant to learn in school, at the same time as they are being, socialized through their schooling. So to them, it's I think it's fairly opaque, but these are tools to help drive. To help give intentions to the people who are creating the curriculum and who are doing the teaching and the environmental supports, so that they can see the links between all of these things and set up their programming in a way that integrates all that without creating additional burdens for themselves or for the kids. That's the idea. Now we have to try it.
Okay, Suzanne, would you like to, I've asked Suzanne to respond to Leanne's remarks and also to talk a little bit about the Scottish experience. And Suzanne, can you take us forward then, please?
Yes, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Leanne, for your presentation. It certainly chimes with a lot of work we're doing in Scotland, so that was a reassurance from my perspective. And thank you to Doug for the opportunity to talk a bit about Scotland. So I would like to provide just a bit of context. First of all, around Scotland, it's a very small country of 5 million people. We are part of the UK, but we have a separate education system. 95% of our children go to the local school. And we have a high investment in education to support schools, even in the most remote communities where it might just be one teacher and one pupil. And the reason I say that is because our curriculum is not a prescriptive curriculum, but context is everything, because it's about staff working with children and meeting their needs of the children that are directly in front of you. So lots of variety in terms of how the curriculum is delivered. But despite being, we've very high aspirations for our children and young people. We love our bairns. But despite that, being a high resource nation, we have significant and persistent inequalities in education and health. In fact, our data shows that education inequality mirrors health inequality. And we have evidence that of a cumulative impact of deprivation, so that the attainment gap begins to develop in preschool and continues through formal schooling. And we know there's a strong relationship between socioeconomic status and achievement, and that exists. And I guess, part of that is Scotland taking an honest look at itself when we have high income, and yet we have communities where deprivation is having a huge impact on young people. So much so that life expectancy in some communities is 20 years less. So this has been going on for many years, and now the solution to that is to have more targeted interventions to break the cycle of deprivation and interrupt the pattern of poor outcomes for our most vulnerable children. So we've got high preventative spend starting at early learning, and I know that a lot of countries are doing that because the research is very convincing. But my focus today is on the cross-curricular strategy. It's a universal provision where health and well-being, along with literacy and numeracy, has become a core element in the reform of our curriculum. Our curriculum for excellence was launched in 2010, and that provided the foundations of knowledge, skills and attributes which equip young people for learning, life and work. And Leanne, they're very similar to what you were talking in your presentation. And what that did in terms of making health and well-being a core element, it shifted the health promoting schools model to health and well-being responsibility of all, where it's embedded across all learning, across all subjects, so that we have a sustained participation in activities that develop mental, emotional, social and physical well-being in our young people. Our curriculum is defined as the totality of experiences wherever the learning takes place. So I was pleased to see, Doug, in the slide with the circle with the colours, that it's about children where they learn in school and also beyond school. And we have 4 contexts for learning that make up our curriculum. One is the ethos and the life of the school as a community. When you go into a school, what does it look like and feel like? And can you tell that children's well-being is being supported? We have subject areas, we have IDL, interdisciplinary learning, and then the fourth context for learning is the opportunities for personal achievement. And these four areas, it's not just about teachers, it's about all staff that work with children and young people being able to contribute to children's mental, emotional, social and physical well-being through all these aspects. So this area of responsibility of all has the key skills and knowledge and context, and that's one part of health and well-being as a curriculum area. But we also have 3 subject areas that sit within health and well-being, and you won't be surprised to hear that they're physical education, food and health, and PSE, personal and social education, which is the equivalent of your HPSD. Each subject is structured around experiences and outcomes that are planned as part of learning and teaching based on the needs of the children and young people in front of you. We have the child and the young person at the centre, and the reason for that is that, and this is where context is everything in Scotland, is that the teachers are the experts of the children in front of them, and critically, pupils themselves are the experts of themselves, and therefore pupil voice is very important in Scottish education. And therefore it's up to the staff to plan learning with the children and young people that enables them to develop learning and learn key skills for learning, life and work. So that's our big mantra in terms of Scottish education under health and wellbeing. So what are these key skills for learning, life and work, and what does that mean if you're a physical education teacher or you're a science teacher or a music teacher? So it's very clear in Scotland for us that health and wellbeing area is based on an assets-based approach. And again, I was pleased, Leanne, to hear you talk about that there are developmental milestones and that there are certain competencies that reach across particular situations, whether it's about sexual health or it's about substance misuse. So our approach is very much an assets-based approach, building on capabilities and attributes, rather than starting from, and I say this lightly, a health deficit model. Teenage pregnancy, let's do something. Too many children are taking drugs, let's do something. Rather, what we try and use is look at children, what they should know and be able to do from an assets-based approach. So we created benchmarks last year in 2017 for the 3 subject areas of physical education, food and health and PSE, and they explicitly set out what children should know and be able to do from age 3 through to 15, providing a progressive, coherent structure. So it's the same competencies that children will develop and learn for 12 years, consistently across all curriculum areas. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to develop in children and young people to move from that dependency at age 3 to independence. That our young people become agents of their own health as individuals and as responsible citizens, effective contributors, successful learners and confident individuals, that they can demonstrate that in their learning, in their life and work, and also in their communities. So we have huge policy and legislation that I'm not going to go into that aligns with all of that. I guess the big challenge for us is around the practice. We have 51,000 teachers and many of them are doing fantastic work, and I would encourage you to come to Scotland. You'll be very welcome to come and see this enacted, this policy enacted in practice. But I guess I would like to just finish with some of the challenges we have, and they're very similar to what Leanne spoke about in her presentation. This year, we did a thematic review on personal and social education. We went across 55 schools. We spoke to young people to ask them what they said about PSE. We asked teachers, we asked parents, and we asked partners. And the report was just published last month, and I'm happy to send that on to everyone to read. What came across is our PSE is well resourced and planned for in school. It's timetabled, but there's inconsistency across Scotland. You might not be surprised at that. There's inconsistency in terms of delivery. There's inconsistency in terms of what young people said about it. Some children and young people loved learning the competencies. Other ones felt they were quite boring. They couldn't see the relevance. So there's a lot of work that we have to do in Scotland around professional learning to ensure that there's consistency in delivery, that our staff feel confident and competent to deliver PSE. And it's not easy when you're looking at things like substance misuse and sexual health and social media. I guess the other challenges we have, again mentioned earlier, is how we monitor and track health and wellbeing and measure the impact of the work that's going on in schools. And there is that tension that we find, in particularly around the responsibility of all, where we're not measuring progress because we think that children's learning and health and wellbeing is dependent on their circumstances that can change within an instant, for example, with a bereavement. So I think we need more intelligence in the system, and I'd be really pleased to continue conversations that you've set up, Doug, with the network around, if we find there are interventions that are effective, that they've been evaluated as effective, it's difficult to define how we scale that up, and importantly how we maintain it and sustain it on a larger scale across our country as a nation. So I guess, that's the challenges I think that we're all wrestling with, and I'm welcome to have further discussion around that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Great. Questions and comments for Suzanne first, and then for both Leanne and Suzanne, or your own thoughts in the matter of this challenge of competency-based curricula and cross-curricular approaches.
This is Leanne. I just have one quick comment on Suzanne's presentation. Thank you. First of all, it's very interesting, and also more convergence here. But what you said about the health deficit model, I think that's important, and I don't know that I stressed that enough, but that's clearly why we were moved to go beyond just the themes, or in other words, the problems. It's like we're not trying to fix things, we're just trying to get kids to stay healthy and well. So and I think that it's a positive approach of that kind that is more compatible with the school system and what they want to achieve, and in terms of health promotion also, it's a much more positive message. Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Leanne. Other comments and questions?
Yeah, I'd like to just agree with both of you on that. Just to say that in terms of the assets-based approach, one of the things that we want to appropriate, we're talking exclusively about low-income countries, so it's a slightly different scenario. But what we try to do is for children to assess their own capacities or their own knowledge, or to put together what they know and think and do before they start on embarking on a particular piece of learning, whatever it is. But also, and I don't know whether this is something which you have found useful, perhaps not so much for adolescents, but for younger children, is building on the assets and skills of the households and the communities, which are really, which have a lot to offer in terms of, what the children can find out from them. Does that come into your picture? So that there's an interaction between the home and the school, or is that entirely sort of something one would avoid in your case? So that's a question. And the last thing I wanted to say was, a lot of the things that you've mentioned, both of you, are very our sort of cross-cutting dimensions for everything that has to be achieved, because we have a very sort of solid kind of core of food, diet, nutrition, sort of stuff. So it's very sort of, we've got a solid kind of central competency area there. And all of these things that you've listed, or most of them, self-knowledge, stress, asking for help, engaging, social interaction, etc., they all come in as criteria rather than as co-targets. Not as the sort of which are hooked onto the main target, like sort of eat more veg or whatever it is. So I wondered how much you take that position, or is PSE then a subject of its own, without any particular content, topic, reference? Do you see what I mean? Have I said that right?
I think certainly in Scotland, because we don't have a prescriptive model, then where we see that it works particularly well in best practice would be where PSE is co-produced with the staff and children together, so that it starts with themselves. And I like the notion you talked about, Leanne, in terms of self-knowledge. It has to start with self-knowledge, and it has to start with the children, their context in school and also their life outside. So schools are changing in Scotland to look more at local data in terms of neighbourhood statistics, health statistics, so that they understand better the lives that children have when they come into school, and make that connection across with parents and the communities that the children live in, so that the PSE programme should very much reflect the children themselves and also the communities they live in. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help indeed, yes.
I can respond to. So the first part of your question, in terms of community assets, I think you're right. And when we usually talk about school health promotion, we talk about the school context, and by school context we mean school, family, and community. And so the perspective is always the school's perspective, because you have to take one perspective, but then and have one, and focus on what that instance or can do, but always taking into account how the school can engage and involve the families and the community, and how they can share resources, and how they can amplify each other's messages and programming as well. So there is a very integrative way of looking at this. That's explicit in the model that I presented. But when you do it very quickly like that in 10 minutes, I can't get into all the details. And then the other bit. I'm not sure I completely understood your question, but I think that I have one comment that's relevant, I think, to it, and it's that this idea of social and personal competencies that are cross-cutting and that are not specific to particular issues or problems in health and well-being. We're seeing more evidence that this is really what's missing or what's needed from current or from existing approaches to teaching health and in schools. Because I was involved in a survey exercise last year of the health of high school students in the province of Quebec, and it's a second cycle of this population survey, and the results from the second cycle shows that adolescents are continuing to improve in matters of physical health. They know about nutrition. They smoke less. They even drink less. They're on all of those physical health indicators. It's either stable or there's some progress. But when you look at their mental health, it's declining. And a lot of it, when you look at the associations, you see things like feeling of belonging, or having close, meaningful relationships, or feeling that you're contributing socially, and so on, or emotional distress, things like that. So I think that's
really my question: is it possible to make things like that actually the core of the learning? Is it not? Are they not things which are sort of which you want to emerge as byproducts? I mean, children can always say, I want to be better at football, or I want to learn dancing, or something like that. So they have a very clear idea of what they want, and then the spin-offs, around that, or teamwork, or the health, or whatever, are sort of hugely important, and they develop an appreciation of those through doing the thing that they want to do.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just sort of trying, what would be a child's go?
Right.
I mean, you can't teach asking for help, but you can incorporate it into 20 other. Yes.
That's the idea. That's the idea. Again, it's not necessarily to make this explicit to the children themselves, but to really embed those those intentions and those concepts within the various means that you're using to teach the children and to engage them. So if it means that you provide opportunities for them to pursue their interests in a safe and congenial manner, then you're promoting all of that. So it's at the core of intentions, but it's not the subject matter. It's sort of infused into it. Is that clearer?
Well, it's very encouraging because, let's say, the whole what shall I call this, it's an agenda. Okay, the whole agenda that both of you are proposing and the basic principles underlying them are all the same as ours, and we just attach it all to the idea of eating better and protecting the environment. So we have this sort of central core, which through which we would hope to build these capacities. So it fits very nicely with us.
Well, just jumping in here and maybe moving towards sort of where do we go from here, and I was poking through the websites of both Quebec and Scotland and a few other high resource countries where they have been working on cross-curricular approaches, and there are some interesting variations, but the model that both Leanne and Suzanne commented on is there. I think countries are struggling through the hard part of mapping it out and being able to say, okay, this is the plan of action so that all children will be able to benefit from this type of learning, teaching and learning. But there's some real realities that we're confronting in the Fresh Work Group, and the first one has been mentioned, that there isn't. It's very hard to measure, as that conversation, it's very hard to measure the skills or competencies that we're talking about, and we're working in an environment where there isn't any standardized reporting out on student learning about health and personal and social development anywhere in the world, and certainly not at the global level. But there is no equivalent of PISA, which measures literacy and numeracy, or there's a science version of that. There's no standard realistic output that we can benchmark and then see whether it's being achieved in one country or in all countries. And so that's a real gap. And then there are a few other really major challenges as well, practical challenges, and one of them is instructional time. We're going to be having a session in the new year about this, and learning takes time, obviously, and so being able to know that time in the classroom or time outside the classroom is being devoted to this kind of learning is something that we ought to know about not only at the global level but at the country level or at the various levels where education is delivered. We were unpleasantly surprised by the fact that there isn't much data about that. I was brought into the school health movement back in '88, and one of the major studies that intrigued me was a big study done in the US where they found that 50 hours of health instruction did have an impact on behavior, and so that led to a number of provinces upgrading their health education curriculum with that finding. But if you look for studies saying how much is actually being delivered in classrooms or in out of classroom activities, there is no data. So I'm looking forward if Suzanne, if that was part of your report, looking at that would be really good, because I think we really need to know more about that kind of basic stuff. To put it in medical terms, what is the dose, what is the duration, and what is the intensity that is actually being delivered, and is it working in terms of those competencies that we're all trying to work towards. And so that's really challenging, and I think that's where the work group is not going to be able to solve that, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to point to it as a challenge for the future, that we we need to measure and monitor that kind of learning much more effectively than we have in the past, and that can lead to not from the point of view of reporting out and having report cards, but from the point of view of being able to improve on what we're doing in terms of our practice and policy. So that's kind of where we're going to as a work group, French work group, over the next little while, and then specifying down exactly what is the minimum in the various paradigms that are used to behind those words, health and personal and social development, or PSE, or PSHE, or life skills, and so on. What exactly are the outcomes, or the outputs that we can expect reasonably at the end of primary school, at the end of secondary school? So we're challenging a number of people who have been working on health literacy and social emotional learning and resilience and all those big ideas, those big paradigms. What exactly is realistic to expect in 3 different contexts: low resource, high resource, and conflict affected. And that's, again, there's no that we found thus far, no research that can help guide us in that. People are working on that, I'm pleased to say, and members of our research network will be able to probably jump in and help out, but it's a real challenge not having the benchmarks nor not having the data. So that's kind of where the situation is, and it's very important if we don't have that kind of articulation that Leanne and Suzanne have described, then it does become a series of topics, a series of suitcases, as Leanne has noted. So that's kind of the reality of the situation as far as I can see. I don't know if Leanne and Suzanne, you want to comment on that. Is that a reality that you're seeing?
Yeah,
or that...
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Doug. I think that Scotland's teachers and everyone involved in policy and and staff that are not teachers in schools, non-teaching staff, you don't have to convince them of the importance of health and well-being, and you don't even have to convince the Scottish Government, who has funded, who has resourced it hugely. But the evidence is not there because of all the things that you just described. When we did our PSE report and we were out in these 55 schools, from early learning into secondary schools and special schools, when we were asking staff about the amount of work they're doing, and they were doing at least, this is when I'm saying it's well-resourced, it's timetabled time. In primary it's called health and well-being, and in secondary schools it tends to be called personal development, or PSE. Timetabled at least 1 or 2 periods, which is 2 times 50 minutes, or 1 50-minute period. That's a lot of resourcing. But when we were asking them, so what's the impact? How do you know? And there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that was coming from teachers. Oh, do you know, the children are they're nurtured, they feel safe in school, we've got great relationships in the school, but no national data, no school level data that was particularly robust or valid, and teachers acknowledged that they had to get better at that. And that's why I still think we have a challenge of monitoring and tracking and measuring the impact, because when people resource things, they want to find out if there's an impact to that. So there's a real tension, I think, around that. So I can certainly send you the report, and you'll see the tension that's in there around that.
Doug, did you want to respond? Or
Yes, please. Yep.
Should I just go ahead? Okay. Regarding the resources, well, Susan also mentioned that in Scotland, despite being a high-income country, there are a lot of inequities, and it's the same is true in Canada. And I know that when we talk about this stuff, or the way that I present it, it sounds very much like a high-income country kind of proposition. But we were challenged to think about how we would apply this model, not in a low-income country, but for instance, in the indigenous communities within the province or within the country. And so that triggered some interesting thoughts about how universal this kind of approach might be. And we didn't have the opportunity to dig very deep, because the project was then reoriented in another way. But I remember one of the conclusions that we came to was that, okay, if we were to take this and adapt it for very low income communities in the north of Quebec, we would focus less on the educational curricular part of it, but much more on the supporting environment aspect of it. You know, start there and put some of that in place before you start thinking that you can, you know, teach the children how to make the right choice when the right, or when, you know, or where the choice that you would like them to make is not available in their environments. So it changes a little bit the emphasis of what you're doing and how, but I think that, you know, the model could be adapted to different contexts.
Okay. Other comments or suggestions or places that might be working on this that we could bring into this participation, into this process? Anybody else on the line or work that's being done? If you wanted to just email me any of those follow-ups, we'll be happy to do that as we start to write the report on these three things. I had sort of three concluding comments or thoughts, and again, they're reality-based and they're coming from a former lobbyist. And one of them is the macro political environment. And as you know, OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has a lot of impact on education ministries around the world. And I'm pleased to say that their work on what they call Education 2030 is starting to understand that they need to address health and personal and social development better than they did when they first started. In the session description for this webinar, I've identified some of the working documents that they have, and I'd invite you to take a look at them. But the reality is that process about competencies is really coming out of a frame of mind that is looking at vocational competencies. And you will all have read about 21st century learning, and if you read through that, it's pretty good in terms of soft skills around being more productive and getting better jobs and being more entrepreneurial and so on, but it isn't really what we would call health and personal and social development. So I'm pleased to say that that universe is broadening for them. There was a recent meeting in Paris and that at the end of October that had all these documents coming to it, but it's really a struggle. There is some early work on competencies that OECD did in 2005 that did have health and wellness in it, but it disappeared for a while. Now it seems to be coming back. But what they're working on is all interesting and very useful, but it's all quite unwieldy at the moment. And so the macro political environment coming down from organizations like OECD to high resource countries is going to be somewhat murky or confused. And then the two other things more closer to home. Well, one is hopeful, but I reviewed an article for a journal article from looking at teaching health in other subjects. It was the title had the words "add in" the title, and the project was reporting on how teachers in math or history or whatever, they were generally supportive of the idea of including health and social development issues in their work, but they had no idea how to do it, and some of them were quite uncomfortable making that shift over away from their own discipline, which they're also under pressure to cover a lot of material. So it's a real challenge at the teacher level for them to make that shift, and I'm sure Suzanne, you would be able to tell more stories from Scotland about that, but at a teacher level, it really is a challenge to make that shift, because we have teachers working in boxes and they actually gravitate towards the disciplines. If you ask a math teacher, well, he's kind of a mathematician, or they gravitate towards their disciplines that they've been teaching, and that's a good thing for the kids. But it is a challenge to ask them to think more broadly. But the other last thing, and I really like Jane's comment. I'm on grandpa duty. I have been this fall, taking my two granddaughters to school every Thursday morning, and I've been bugging them about, what I'm trying to get them to reflect on what they're learning and to kind of think ahead what they're going to learn that day. So I've been asking, what did you learn yesterday, and what do you think you're going to learn today? And it's quite a challenging question for them, because we're going to do art, or I'm going to whatever. So it's helping them to maybe start with that first skill is quite different, at least from one 6-year-old and one 9-year-old in my universe. That to see it in their eyes, and so it's and again, maybe that's part of the process. We need to have a lot more research about how students perceive this kind of learning, and what they think they're learning and what they'd like to learn. So maybe that's a good point to end the conversation. First of all, any comments from Leanne or Suzanne to that final little political message or personal message?
Yeah, Doug, I think you raised a really important question about the employability, about the competencies around vocational competencies. We've got, again, attention in Scotland because we have a huge, big political drive to developing the young workforce, getting our children in Scotland to be employable. And what we noticed when we were out at the PSE is looking at kids in age 16, 17, 18 and asking them what their PSE lessons were about. There was a lot of that around, getting a job and doing apprenticeships and things. And I had a worry around that because I thought, it's much wider. PSE is much wider, and yet sometimes I think what happens is that when you've got public and political and professional attention is drawn away from PSE in terms of the competencies that we've agreed to another agenda, it can be very difficult to bring it back in.
Leanne, a final word? Yeah.
Can I be able to think? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jade. Go ahead, Jane.
Just Leanne wraps up. I was just thinking that, like you say, seeing where you're going or where you've been seems to me, especially for adolescents who are sort of getting, towards having their own goals, it's kind of important. And that implies that a competence is a kind of pathway. You see where you are and you build something and you end up and you think, well, I've got that. And that's why I was sort of asking how the kids see the curriculum, because they are getting to be more autonomous at this age. And the other thing that I was thinking was, I agree with you, and we're constantly bedeviled by the fact that it's very difficult to show formal, well-evaluated assessments of achievement in these areas. But I also think that all the areas which you've described are extremely visible to the participants in any task. But all of them, self-knowledge, coping with emotions, and all of this stuff, and who in the class is best at whatever it is. These particular social skills and things. They know, and they know it's not that it's an obscure book. And the criterial assessment of having done something and achieved something, if the class is then sort of asked, did we manage this bit okay? If they have a checklist, which is their sort of self-generated or their own, or at least something they agree with, they can produce quite a good informal assessment, I think, of how they've done the thing, which is roughly what you're talking about. Have we exercised these social skills? Have we exercised these self-controlling, these decision-making skills, etc., etc.? They can say that. The trouble is, how do you convert that into something which will convince governments and donors and people? That seems to me. But I don't think the criteria themselves are difficult to assess from experience. I don't know if that's of any, worth sort of saying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jane. Leanne, any final thoughts?
Not really. I think you've done a nice job of concluding and raising, the ongoing challenges of all of this, and I'm conscious of time as well. So yes. I think I'll leave it at that.
Great. Well, just to on your behalf, thank you. Well, on behalf of the FRESH Working Group and FRESH Partners, thank you very much for this conversation. And we'll be posting this on the FRESH website shortly, and we'll be engaging you, at least by email, in follow-up in terms of the writing of the report on this section. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And if people, I'm just going to stop the